Hello and welcome to another video. This time I'm going to show you how I painted the leather boots on this orc model. The techniques used can be transferred to painting any model or any leather tone. So let's get started. I used Citadel Rhinox hide for the base coat. This was thinned with some water to give a smooth finish. The coverage of this paint is good, so thinned down it should only take a couple coats. Now both boots are base coated. I'll begin to block out the areas of the boots that will be lighter. For this I'm using Citadel Steel Legion Drab. Again, this has been thinned with water, about 50-50 paint to water. The paint was applied to the peaks of the folds, leaving the recessed areas in the Rhinox hide. A good tip for applying the highlights is to look at where the light from the lamps is reflecting on the model and naturally creating shadows. As you can see, I'm trying to be as neat as I can at this stage. This will minimize the amount of cleaning up in the next steps. Now both boots are highlighted. We can start to blend those highlights into the base coat. For this I'm making a mix of Rhinox hide, Steel Legion Drab and a little XV88. I add water to this to make it into a glaze. Approximately 3 parts water to 1 part paint. I am looking to create a mix that is somewhere in between the base coat and the highlight. Before applying the glaze to the model, I remove most of it on a paper towel. The brush is just damp, nothing more. The glaze should dry very fast as it is extremely thin. This way you can build multiple glazes over each other to create perfect transitions. Notice I am only focusing on the areas between the base coat and the highlights. These are the areas that require blending. Several glazes are applied to create the smoothest transition possible. Once both boots are painted to this stage, it's time to darken the shadows a little. To do this, Vallejo black and some more Rhinox hide are mixed together. I add water to this, roughly 50-50 paint to water. A small Anu-sized 00 brush is used to apply it. This is so I have much more control over where I put it. I only want to apply it to the darkest areas. Again, remove most of the paint on a paper towel before applying. I find a stippling technique helps create some interesting texture. That's both boots now painted. Let's look at building the highlights some more. For this I've added some Citadel Zandri dust and some Vallejo dark sea grey to my wet palette. Mix the two paints roughly 50-50. Then add a little Steel Legion drab. I then add a little water. This will make the paint flow better off the brush. These highlights will be placed in the same areas as the Steel Legion drab highlights, only this time will cover a smaller area. Notice my brush strokes. They are generally heading towards where the brighter areas are. This is because the brush will always deposit the most paint at the end of the brush stroke. So if you did this the other way around and applied the paint from the brightest areas with your brush strokes heading towards the midtones, you would be depositing most of your highlight color into those areas instead. This would make blending very difficult. Again, stippling can be used to create textures, like you would see on worn leather. Notice when the paint dries, it becomes slightly darker than when it's first applied. So a second coat is a good idea. Applying the second coat of the same highlight color to a slightly smaller area can help when it comes to blending. I have highlighted the other boot off camera. I have added some more Rhinox hide to my palette now. Add a little water. So I'm going to use this to make some tiny marks and scratches. This will represent a worn leather look. Again, I'm using a 00 brush with a fairly good point on it. It's important to be accurate and take your time with making these brush marks. I'm now going to blend the highlights in some more. This is done with a precise glaze of Steel Legion Drab and a little XV88. This was watered down to about 3 parts water to 1 part paint. As always with glazing, I remove most of the paint on a paper towel before applying it to the model. I'm only focusing on where the highlights meet the midtones. These are the areas that require the most work. As you can see, I am being very accurate with the brush and only applying the glaze where I want it. Once this is done, I decided to add some warmer red tones. This was done with some scale 75 Dubai Brown, made into a thin glaze with 4 or 5 parts water to 1 part paint. As this glaze is a lot thinner, well, mainly water, it can be applied more liberally. I try to avoid getting it on the brightest highlights though. You can see how little I apply. and how quickly it dries. This allows multiple layers to be applied quickly. If you apply too much, or it's not drying quick enough, then a hairdryer can be used to speed up the process. To boost the highlights a little more, I added some Vallejo Deck Tan to my highlight color. This was only used on the highest peaks and edges. Also, I continue to use a stippling motion with my brush. This builds on the texture I've already created. You can also highlight the underneath of the scratches and marks made earlier with Rhinox hide. Some very thin glazing was put over everything to tie it all together. The first glaze was with XV88 with about 5 parts water to 1 part paint. The more passes you make with this, the smoother the blending will become. I have now added some Citadel Incubi Darkness, plus a little Citadel Orn Fang Brown to the Dubai Brown glaze. The Incubi Darkness is again very thin, roughly 5 parts water to 1 part paint. I'll start with the Dubai Brown glaze and apply it in the same manner. I then do the same thing with the incubi darkness. Then with some rhinox hide in the mid-tones and shadows. And that's the leather boots finished. You can use this method for painting any leather on any model. You can even switch out colors to create your own version. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, please like and subscribe so you don't miss more videos.